about some sci-fi movie about the Chinese phone number. What's in your 300-hour class?
Oh.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
Oh.
I was like, oh, I don't know. This has nothing to do with anything.
That was a tough night, yes.
That's when I stopped. I was like,
Yeah.
I
No,
was
that didn't end well, actually.
that was in this class?
That's not,
I
I did lose my temper a little bit. Yeah, because I was like, I need to teach this and I'm not able to teach this.
I eventually stopped.
Yeah. Sorry about that. She was watching the wrong video, because I posted the wrong video, but it's now correct. So let's talk about this. What do you remember about the Yoga Sutra so far?
Oh, geez. Well, it was started out as oral and then
I was gonna say that much.
and it was codified by, oh my gosh, I'm not gonna tell.
Patanjali.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Say it again.
Patanjali.
Yes, yes. And it's essentially like, okay, I'm gonna stop letting someone else go in because I just lost
Okay.
my train of thought.
So
Sorry.
Okay,
I'm sorry.
we're just saying, what do you remember about the Yoga Sutra? We're gonna add on.
Yeah, it's Patanjali.
It's
Not
Patanjali.
Patanjali.
That's what we remember.
Well, yoga means to yoke and su means sweet and sutra means thread. So it's bringing things together. I didn't say that very eloquently. Well, I just wrote my reflection for the weekend I missed, so this is kind of a little prep.
I have to trigger my memory.
Okay.
But once you started speaking, I could fill in blanks.
Yeah,
Oral Patanjali.
I forgot that.
But like, give us a hint about.
Do we talk about like the first chapter?
Yes.
Yeah,
And what was the first chapter about?
The reverses.
yeah.
No.
Yeah, that I am. No, that's.
That I know.
That's, sorry.
That's
That's so,
I think we put the light on, right? We could, yes.
Oh, good idea.
I got it.
I just don't want to get off, I'm sorry.
I got
Thanks. Okay.
Woo! Is there a different mic?
No, that's
Okay.
great. That's it. That is it. So, yes, there, okay, so you have to learn the first four sutras for the knowledge of seven.
Yes.
What do you mean by learn that? Like recite them?
Not in Sanskrit, but in English, no, they are.
Like paraphrase?
I think it's the first three, sorry.
Paraphrase?
It's the first three. They're very short threads.
Yeah,
I mean, we could probably learn them.
yeah.
So you're right, now begins the instruction on yoga. And do you remember like what that meant?
Okay, I love that.
I remember just it's very the first one, it's just in depth and now, because I don't remember that.
That's okay, just that sometimes we have auspicious beginnings. We do have to like come into our practice, like when you're teaching, you know, it's good to have that centering because, you know, someone's coming in off the street, they need time to find like, you know, this transition between the external world into the internal world.
I have a quick question that I had forgotten to ask. Like, are the sutras intended to learn consecutively? Like, could you just flip through and pick one and focus on that, or should
Well, there's
you?
different ways to teach them.
Okay,
Like, first of all, I guess they're ones that go together.
okay,
So like, you know, like the first 5 sutras, or the first 4, actually the first 10, they're all really about one topic. And these are the chittapratis. Do you remember that? Yeah. And then we have some sutras about practicing non-attachment. And we have some sutras about trustful surrender. We have the ones about the 8 limbs coming up. You know, so they are kind of sequential, they make sense sequentially, but like, remember when we did the lotus of the heart? I was like, here's some sutras about the heart, and they were all over the place because they're not consecutive.
true, okay,
So when you teach, if you wanna like, you know, so say you were teaching about a topic and you just wanted to, that's more often how the Yoga Sutra is taught, not in a certification, but in a general sense. It's just like, here, we have this that we're referring to in Sutra. You know, or people will pick out the 8 limbs, or the yamas and the niyamas, you
Okay.
know. But it's almost like a conversation too, like think about really broad outline. It's like, what is yoga? How do you do it? Practice in non-attachment. How else do you make your mind still? Well, wait, that's not enough information. How else? And then they do Kriya Yoga. And how else? Then they do a lift. It's almost like they keep getting more in depth. They're very general at the beginning, and then if you look, they keep getting more and more specific. So, and the idea here, you know, you might have something about the 8 limbs on the knowledge assessment. You'll have the first 3. But like, I don't expect you to understand the Yoga Sutra because it's something that we go over, you know, time and time again. It needs like some time to stick. You know, that's why I'm asking you, like we went over it, but it's like, oh, wait, what were we talking about again?
Well, you know what? I found the notes and I see a problem
What?
that I had written, read the intro of the
Yeah.
sutras and something, first 5 Yoga Sutras in the manual.
Yeah.
And I am just now
Yeah.
reading my note to read those things.
Well, let's do
That's
it.
enough for, that's
Yes,
the first 5.
First 3.
First 3 for first.
You can, let's talk about what they are. Let's just,
Okay.
like, okay. So first, now begins the practice of yoga. So it's like a auspicious beginning, a blessing of some kind, like a lot of times, you know, there are rituals and different traditions where you do like a, you know, a baptism or a brisk, or I don't know what it's called, or like a, you know, there's different, like when a person goes, there's different rites of passage that mark, this is a new beginning, you are now,
Like Australian walkabout.
yes,
I
yeah.
don't know why I thought of that.
And there's like this whole thing that like now they're saying that we don't have that rite of passage anymore, and that's harmful. I had someone who was a professor with a friend who talked about that. And you know, this whole idea of, you know, that's when you become an adult, you go through a test. And, you know, like I think for women, it's kind of built in because we get our period, but guys don't really have something official like that. Yeah. I mean, they have body changes, but like in a lot of cultures, they're out and they get tested. They have to go through some kind of trial, some kind of warrior thing to become a man.
Like an initiation.
An
into
initiation, yeah,
How about
Bar mitzvahs.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
This is terrible, but I don't really know what auspicious means.
Auspicious means special, like
Okay.
significance.
Good, oh my God.
Yeah, good omen,
beginning,
kind of good
yes.
beginning, yeah.
Okay.
So that's, so, you know,
So it's marking that we're
something,
starting.
yeah, we're starting something that's
Okay.
important here. Yeah. So that's the first one. Then the second one is the most popular, the definition, well, it's one of the most popular.
Mastery of early dependencies of the mind.
Yes. Yoga is mastery of the mind's fluctuations. So remember, our thoughts they almost have like a vibration. You can feel them, like when you're like really, I mean, think about like when you're playing a game or doing a puzzle, like your brain is really thinking and there's like a really kind of energy to that. Or when you're just distracted and you can't really catch your thought, there's an energy like that. You know, but so the mastery, and that's like my whole life, mastery over that is yoga, you know, so it is letting your mind rest in something else.
I
So,
just got into the Wordle this past week.
oh, really?
Have you been doing it?
No, but Adira's like super good at it. He gets it in like 2 tries. Like, I
That's
don't even
really
know
good.
how this kid does it. I'm like,
That's amazing.
That's amazing. It's
Yeah.
hard.
he like gets all of them.
I know, but
like,
when you just said, when you get into a game, I'm like I'm like on day 4 and I'm like, is it midnight yet?
Yeah.
My next word.
Like I
Trying to
get,
kill
yeah, I whatever, or like,
Something, yeah,
updating the website or something, and if someone comes and tries to talk to me, I'm like, it's a big jump.
Yeah.
To actually go into social mode from my really
Fixed.
yeah,
Focus.
focus. But like, I mean, that's one kind of vibration. There's all different kinds of vibration that our thoughts have, but they seem to have this vibration, and that's like the chitta vrittis. The chitta is a part of the mind, remember?
Yes.
And then the vrittis are this fluctuating. So yoga is a mastery. And what happens when you master fluctuation? Well,
Samadhi.
yeah. What's the third sutra?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, here's my notes.
Is it page 89?
I'm not sure.
It's page 10.
Yeah. Oh, I'm in the manual.
Then the sphere becomes established in its essential nature.
Yes. So this is kind of a loaded one.
Then the sphere.
So we are
becomes
trying to
established.
become like self-aware, right?
Are we
In
the
yoga.
seer? I feel like you have to reach being a seer.
No. No,
80, 89.
so, for example, watch your breath. Who's watching? Your seer. So we all have, like, remember Purusha and Brahma? Yeah. We all have this kind of witness. And then everything in this witness is property. So we have a witness, and it's like really kind of elusive. Like when it's almost like when you try to catch a hold of it, like you can watch your breath, you can even notice what your thoughts are or your emotions. Then when you try to think about who is this person or who is this thing that's watching, it's really hard to catch a hold of.
Okay, yeah.
And like, you know, what we're doing in yoga is trying to kind of peel back the layers and find this essential nature, which is not our thoughts, it's not our emotions, it's not our body, it's something else. And so when all of the thought waves stop for your master, then you're resting in your own true nature. And that's probably why we do meditation, because we want to feel connected to what? Connected to something, a higher reality of some sort. So
Kate, I was doing this meditation online because I couldn't focus myself. So I just followed online meditation. So I was telling you, I followed Sadhguru.
yes,
Yeah. So I was following him, and then he said, while meditating, he kept saying, "This is not my body. This is not even my mind." He kept saying that,
Yeah.
like, you know. So I wanted to ask, why is that?
because
of this. Now we
because the self is really not limited by all of those things. The true self. You know, good thing, because like my body's getting older, and I don't think I want that to be. I think like something a little bit more than that, you know. And my emotions, like they come and go, or I get used to them, or they change. That can't be something impermanent. Like the true self is not changing. So yeah, we believe our thoughts. Remember that, you know, what you asked me on the podcast, don't believe anything that you think.
Yeah.
Because it's just what we've gotten in the habit of thinking. And we think it's us.
Right.
We think we have this personality. Like we are this kind of person. But that's just a label we put on ourselves. Our true self is not really that.
So this is a weird question, but it's kind of a mental health question. So what if, like, I think when we're learning, or at least the way I think of it, like the essential nature or like the highest self is always good, or what we would assume is righteous, or, you know, what if like someone is discovering that their highest self doesn't feel like that for them? Or like, what if you're schizophrenic and you can't get there? Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like,
Well, two things. It's not good or bad, it just is.
okay,
It's not, it's like a resting place. But if someone has schizophrenia, this is not really a path that they might be able to do.
Yeah,
It's unfortunate, but like, they don't have a resting place and they need other kinds of help than yoga.
Yeah.
Like you have to
Okay.
be, everyone, we're all a little crazy. But, you know, mental health is a spectrum. And, you know, we all have difficulty, you know, some of us are even, you know, have diagnoses about our mental health. But we have to be relatively stable to practice meditation. You know,
yeah,
if not, it's not gonna work.
yeah.
It's
It would be
not.
like a waste. Okay.
And just maybe, oh my gosh, you might drive yourself nuts examining that closely, what,
Right.
you
Okay,
know, that might
right.
make you feel even worse about it.
It wouldn't be a helpful process or
Right.
like you were not opening you're not growing.
Right.
Yeah, okay, all right.
Excuse me, it just does remind me of the summer after I learned to meditate and I had like a nervous breakdown and had like, just was, I mean, like, you know, like panic, so I like called the doctor, what should I do? We have to go to the emergency room, like, well, but, you know, and I didn't understand how that could happen if I had been meditating and I had been, you know, stripping down to this very, you know, essential nature. And then somebody, my husband asked somebody this, and they said that if transcendental meditation, I don't know if it's, maybe it's not just TM, but it can actually trigger something like that.
Well, remember, when we were doing the model of the mind, how all of our impressions are stored in the chitta. And a lot of times we avoid them. We say it's so busy, we, you know, or we have different things that we do to distract ourselves. So when you get quiet and you're alone with what's in there and it's coming up, it can be really scary and destabilizing.
Yes.
You know, so that's,
I can understand how that could happen to you when you're accessing a deeper space, you're like, oh,
yeah.
Right.
I forgot
I
about
also
that.
gonna go
felt like
from
one
that
time I
back
felt
to
very
one.
emotional. Is that normal? Like, very emotional.
Because you weren't aware of them before. Like a lot of times, like I know with emotions, there were some that I just really didn't want to show emotions. And so I tried not to feel them for a long time. And so like when you finally feel them and they're real, it can be really intense. So that's why you want to feel supported. And, you know, that's why we work with asana too for grounding at the same time as we're doing meditation. And, you know, that's why it's good to work within the community or with the teacher, because it's like, then they can, you know.
Yeah, I was like all by myself.
Yeah,
I mean, I
that's-
left- I left
that's
teaching in
scary.
England. I was here for back here and I was starting the academic year again and I just could not imagine how I was going to walk in the classroom and teach classroom.
Yeah.
And I would go in there and I'd be like this. And I remember one student wrote on the evaluation, just calm down.
Fail. No.
And I'm like, you have no idea what it's like to be in this body, because it's like, I can't calm down.
I had like about 10 years into teaching. I had almost like, I had lost all confidence. And I was
That's
afraid to
really
get,
long.
yeah, 10 years like in. And I got really nervous in front of classes. I was just not, it was so crazy. Because I never had felt that way before. I just would come in and then I lost all, and yes, I was like, some of my teachers were really hard on me and I don't know if that was a really good thing. I mean, I guess it was effective, but like it was kind of demoralizing. Like some teachers are like, teachers in your teacher training or like
A yoga teacher.
yoga teacher.
Yeah, that's how it was in Hong Kong too.
Yeah.
It was all about like, you know, these Chinese girls with this body and then,
Yeah.
you know, what you wear and all the poses, and if you're young, they come and help you, like,
Oh,
you know, do that.
geez. Yeah.
It was like crazy.
Huh. Well, see, mine wasn't like that. It was just like, you suck. You didn't explain that well. Like, I remember being really laid into with the teacher. And it was right before I had to do videos taped for the website. And I was just a mess. Like, you don't know what you're talking about. Why would you say that? And I did know what I was talking about, like later, and I actually confronted her about it. I was like, that actually, I really lost confidence after that. And she's like, that was the worst teaching in my life. I'm so sorry. I have no idea why I did that.
Oh my gosh.
But it was like, so I went through a time like that where I was afraid to teach.
How did you come out of it? I guess both.
I actually took time off.
Okay,
I took a year where I didn't teach at all.
okay.
I just ran the business and I stepped away from teaching. And then I started to come back and it's like it never happened. I don't know how it happened. Like it's so weird that I would have been that way.
Yeah.
But it was just, I cared so much about what these people thought of me. And that was my biggest mistake because they don't know everything.
Right.
and, and I'm like, that was crazy. And that's why I always say question, like be a, and some of these, like in that case, like Vikram, like the whole thing, like that was just an abuse of power.
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
And so there are a lot of circumstances where teachers have their own needs of whatever that they want met and they're using you to feel better about themselves or whatever, but they might be making you feel bad in the process, and you just really have to be really careful.
It's sad that because I think of that kind of thing happening in the corporate world, and that yoga would be like untouchable when it comes to that, but I guess nothing is, Yeah.
Well, here's what I think, because it doesn't matter what situation you're in the external world. If you have inner conflict, it's gonna bleed through. It's gonna come out. Yeah, so that's why in yoga, we are looking at that. We're looking at our inner conflict. We're like,
Controlling your mind.
yes, we're trying to, and it's like, isn't it weird because it's like doing tree pose. The mind does not like to be like reined in and controlled. That's actually not helpful. It's more like you want the mind to rest. Like when you're in tree, if you're like, I'm just gonna stay here until she tells me to come out. You feel like it's not really that fun. And you're not resting in the pose and it's not at all relaxing. And same thing with your mind. If you're trying to wrestle it to the ground, that is not going to be fun or at all peaceful or where you're going. You have to be nice to yourself at the same time. I love, like, I think I told you, Jack Cornfield, half his heart, when he talks about training the puppy. Put it back. So I mean, so that's what I would say, like, if the mind is too disturbed, you might need to reach for other things, or if it gets that way for a while. Like in my case, I actually didn't because I wasn't aware enough to know what was going on to even try to figure that out. I just stepped away.
Yeah.
And that was good. But I don't know what you had to do to regain your
Oh, I'm
confidence.
a miracle of modern medicine.
Okay. Yeah, and I think sometimes.
Nothing wrong with that.
Because that's been 20 years now.
Yeah, but you know what? If it's made, like sometimes that's what you need to do to feel okay.
Yeah, but it's because you keep taking it. Do you know what I mean? Like, isn't there some point where you can just like?
I think this might help.
That's what
Yeah.
I was wondering.
I think you might want to, just keep like being self-aware, talking to your doctor about it, and maybe like they would know, okay, you're ready to step down now, or I don't think it's out of the question, but I know it's also very tricky to come off of these things after you've been on them for a while, and you don't want to do anything that's going to make it worse for you. And sometimes we drive ourselves nuts trying to practice and be the best and do it right.
Yeah.
And that's also like, there are no rules with this. Like, you don't have to, like, that's what I always say with people, like, oh, well, do I need to stop drinking coffee or stop eating sugar or stop eating meat? No. The answer is no. You don't have to do any of that to be able to do this. you think about the highest reality, do you think that any of that's gonna matter? You know, really, like, I mean, you think medication's gonna matter when you're dealing with this big, huge concept of a higher reality. It's gonna be peanuts to that.
So if it could make you feel better or something work better while we're here, then
Right.
okay, you know, that's
Yeah.
good.
I've done that with coffee, like, you know, I've cut it out for long amounts of time and brought it back, and I really wanted to not be a coffee drinker. I love it, and it makes me happy.
That too.
It's so good.
You know, and I'm just like, and I'm like, you know, do I want to drive myself nuts because of that? No, I don't.
I
Yeah.
don't give that a personal.
Yeah. So, I mean, so that's where you're like, you know, it's about, you want to use yoga for the right reason. It's to help you live more skillfully and bring you joy. So if you're being really tough on if you're using yoga as another reason to beat yourself up, that's not what we're trying to do. So,
My sister experienced a lot of trauma and she and I both found yoga independently at the same time.
Oh,
because I
wow.
was like away at college and she just fell into it too. And so we would like compare notes or remember, it's like, are you learning tree?
oh, that's cute.
But she told me, she said, I can't meditate. Every time I try to quiet my mind, I relive these horrible things that happened to me.
Yeah.
And I was
Yeah,
like,
that's-
oh, that sucks.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, like I would have never, and I'm still sensitive to that. Like
Yeah.
I'm still sensitive to people who've experienced trauma like that. To like have an expectation that they can do something
Right.
that, you know, that
And
this person
then-
takes for granted.
Doesn't it make sense that we would just then work with the breath? Because that resets the nervous system.
totally.
Because so and when you think about what trauma does to the nervous system, it really gets it out of balance.
I wish you would have.
Yeah, so if you just work with diaphragmatic breathing or crocodile pose, that's actually the most healing thing that you can do. You know, and then you have that strong focus of the breath, you have the felt experience of the, you know, and what I notice about crocodile is like, you know, it's one thing teaching in class, but if you do it as a practice, like you could commit to doing crocodile every day for 10 minutes for a month. What you would notice probably, you might not, but my experience was when I first started, my breath was pretty crappy. You know, like I every day when I started, it took me some time. When I first started looking at my breath, it was like all over the place. And my mind was super busy. But if I stayed there for like 10 minutes, my breath would start to even out on its own without me trying. I just noticed how it was. I'm like, oh wow, it's easy. Or whatever, you know, and then it would start to even out on its own. And then my mind would also, after it went through some of that stuff, it would start to settle. And then that's, you know, and that's one of the things we really use to help with trauma is just the diaphragmatic breathing. Because yeah, some people, meditation, sitting, oh my gosh. it was
Sometimes you don't want to be
horrible.
with your inner self, you
You're
know?
not ready, you're
Yeah.
not strong enough, like, so we're getting to the point in this where we talk about practicing non-attachment, it's in here, what we talked about before. Remember, practice makes someone stronger, so that they can start to look at those things in their life that are like really tough to look at.
And look
Yeah.
at them objectively. instead of-
From a place of strength.
Yeah.
You know, like, I mean, you
Yeah.
can't,
But not being so attached. to it,
Like the
you know what I-
coffee.
yeah,
Like, do I really want to start drinking coffee?
Yeah.
Brings me joy. I
it
love
brings
it.
me joy, I love it.
And you're like, okay, no, I don't want it. Right, like
Yeah.
I think, yeah.
I think that's where it's coming to the point where you.
Yeah.
You say, I'm okay, I made that choice.
Right, or if I'm gonna, you know, even if I'm on a medication and I'm gonna get off of it and it's going to really wreak havoc, I might not want to do that.
Yeah.
Because it just won't, unless there was a good reason to like wean and you went about it, I mean, but sometimes the answer is just like, I know,
It's not a week.
it's not a weakness, like,
Right.
I have a lot of, like, in my family, there's a lot of mental health issues and a lot of my family is on medication, and thank goodness, because they actually, something genetically for us is like, there's like this tendency towards depression. And so, you know, I don't know if it's just in the DNA that the chemical is working out like that. reactions. But like, there's a couple people in my family right now that they absolutely need medication and they're great. Their life is happy, but it wouldn't be if they weren't.
Yeah.
So it's like, you use, and like yoga is all about being skillful. So you use what makes sense
I
for
like that.
you,
Skillful life and find joy.
Yes. So, okay, so we got through, once again, the first two sutras.
We got to 3.
Yeah, the three, yes, we did, you're right, so those are the 3 you need to know. So then it goes through, and we might have talked about this, but I don't think we got this far. Like at other times,
What is the essential?
the highest self, essential nature, like our true nature.
Okay,
It's a weird way.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I interrupted you.
Essential nature, true self, that's the.
Yeah. And then 4 is when you're not resting, when you're not practicing yoga, you're identified with your thoughts. So it's like everyday life. When you're not focusing your mind, you're attached to your thoughts and you're thinking, well, I think that our country should do this, or or whatever. Like, I mean, you are in there. Yeah, right. I mean, like sometimes those are the thoughts that come up. You're
won't unload the dishwasher or something there.
yeah. Oh, I know. And then that's okay. We've all gone. It's all right. Yeah, I mean, sometimes we go and we think these thoughts, and like, I mean, I have this book called The Female Brain. I'll find out who wrote it because my friend got it for me and I can't remember. It was fascinating about how the hormones affect how we're thinking, like during our period, or like the different hormonal things.
And the testosterone when you're
Yes.
like a teenager.
Yeah.
That published some years ago?
Yes.
Yes, I think I have that one,
Yeah, and it was fascinating to me because I'm like, wow, my thoughts are really off. Like, they're really off.
Yeah.
Like, I think about it later, and don't ever tell me that I'm getting my period because then I'll kill you. But like, it's like they're really off. And then when I look at them later, I'm like, why did I think that? Like, why was I so upset about that? But there is really something in our hormones that promotes that or is conducive to that. I don't know if you could say it any differently, but it's crazy.
It's been almost since I read it, but it's still on my shelf,
Yeah. So really fascinating.
Female brain.
Female brain.
And it's written by a neuroscientist, I think.
Yes.
She takes from like a hormonal chemical kind of.
Yeah, why these thoughts are produced, and it's really fascinating because it's like, well, and that's what you start to see through with yoga is because some of the time you're focused. And then you get detached from your thoughts and you're like, oh my gosh, that was just a thought and that was not correct. Like that's the most fascinating thing because we believe things so much that we're thinking.
Oh, yeah.
And then you're like, no, just actually that was totally wrong.
Yeah. Or they snowball
Yeah.
into a scenario that is not even happening.
Right.
I do
Right.
that a lot. So that's interesting about thinking about clearly like hormones affecting our moods and our thoughts. I tend to like catastrophize and like let my thoughts go crazy at night.
Yes.
And I'm wondering if body chemicals start to do
I think
something.
that's true. Like
Yeah.
there's that thing, things go boom in the night.
Yes.
Yes, I have heard that too. Like you actually have more catastrophes going on when you wake up. It's scary.
It's
Well, I don't know
weird.
why.
Like I think
And
like
then
I'm
you're
like if our
wondering,
roof, if we get a leak, I'm not gonna be able to pay for the roof getting fixed. And I will obsess and be like scared.
Yeah.
And then when I wake up, I'm like, what the heck is that?
Yeah.
Like legit, I think
If
like,
my periods, I can't stand my husband when I'm
Oh,
about to get my, morning, I just don't want to see his face.
yeah.
And you know, the week, like, even if you ask me something, and that's it, that's it.
Well, and I find that for me, it's getting worse as I get older.
Yes.
And it's not every month, but when it
Yeah.
comes, I'm like, it's
Yeah.
weird,
Yeah,
yeah.
I don't know
Why
what
would
that
you
is.
even do that? What is wrong with you? And
Yeah.
you're like,
Can't
oh
stand
my gosh.
that one
It's like hard, and I tell him, I'm like, I can't control it.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm like,
same thing,
I cannot, like,
same thing.
if I can, maybe this will help, like, if I identify.
Yeah, you'll be able to see,
I'll be able to
oh,
see it,
and
yeah,
you'll watch yourself doing it.
yeah.
And that's even funny. You're like, I am
There
doing
I
it.
go.
You know,
I-
and it's funny, don't start screaming, you're
Yeah.
screaming.
Yeah.
Like you have like a little bit of tip, like, and sometimes I'm like,
Catch
can you
that.
not call him back right now?
Oh, no, I need to.
You know what I mean? I need to yell, like,
Yeah.
don't, I'm not talking, getting mad at you. You know,
Right, it's so bizarre.
And so,
Great stuff for stand-up.
and like, that's what, so but we're talking about the Yoga Sutra, so at other times, we're really identified with these thoughts. And then for the next 5, they talk about what different kinds of thoughts are.
Yeah,
So one is the correct understanding, like when you're actually right about something. And they talk about different ways to know that, like one is direct experience. Like, you know that when you turn on the hot water and you stick your hand under it, it's hot.
Yeah.
Because you've experienced it. That's the best way to know things. And then there's also, like, remember we talked about inference and testimonial being ways that, okay, maybe this is true. Then there's incorrect knowledge, which is just having the wrong idea about something. You know, like, you know, the classic is the mistaking a snake for, you know, rope. Yeah, like, you know, so we do, those are when we're wrong. Like, and so now we all know that we do that because our minds do that. And then the third one is imagination.
So one's the correct way of knowing and one is the incorrect knowledge.
Yes, and then
And
the
the
third
third
is
is
imagination.
can I ask a quick question about correct? Would correct be like facts, almost like something that can't be disputed? Like the water's hot,
Yes,
okay.
but it's still subjective and it's still a vritti. So it still makes your mind spin. Like, so
Okay.
the fact is all of these, right, wrong, imagination, whatever they are the way our mind usually works in everyday consciousness, and that's what we're trying to master.
Okay,
So just because it's correct doesn't mean it's good.
and it could be different for
Yeah.
all of us, okay,
Yeah.
okay, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So,
Oh my gosh.
yeah, so imagination are the things that we haven't actually experienced, but we can conjure up in our mind. And dreams belong to that category. Remember?
Yeah,
And then memory is when we keep remembering something that happened, it's not happening now, but we keep remembering it, playing it over and over, and probably a different version than actually happened. Yes. Probably a different version. And then the deep sleep, where you don't have any actual, this is different than dreaming. The deep sleep is where your mind is still working, but you have no awareness of it working because there's a disconnect in that, you know, you're not conscious and waking consciousness. And that's the trickiest. And you don't have to worry about it. The point is, the mind is still spinning, you're just not aware of it. So it's still a vritti. So basically, what they do in the Yoga Sutra is they say, okay, we're gonna start talking about yoga. Yoga is the mastery of the mind, and when you are mastering it, you feel great. You're connected with your highest self. And when you don't, you're identified with your thoughts, and here are the kinds of thoughts there are.
so technically, like, any thought could be categorized in one of those 5.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is not productive. But my 51-year-old, very good, very, very good friend is having an affair with a 25-year-old. And I'm like, what the hell are you doing? This is what I'm seeing. I know we're gonna be talking about this later and you're gonna see it too, but you can't see it now. And I'm like, I don't know how to
So identified.
I don't know how to talk to her about her convoluted thoughts that like
I don't think you can.
the rational brain
Yeah.
is not available.
No, it's not.
I know, and it's so disturbing, because I just had like call number 3 coming into this,
Yeah.
and I'm like,
Do you know what, that's,
We spoke about Dharma, remember we were talking about this, so is it her Dharma to?
Yeah, is it your dharma?
Yeah,
The thing is, it's probably not something you're gonna be able to tell her. We also have these things what we call karmic blinders.
Yeah.
Where, like,
for real?
yes, I do believe we do, where we go into a situation where everyone else can see it and be like, oh my gosh.
yes.
But you have karmic blinders on because you have karma to figure out. And so you go into these situations.
Because you don't wanna have to deal with that.
She's supposed to learn something.
Yeah.
She's just experiencing pleasure.
She's
Right.
supposed to, well, it's probably not gonna stay that way.
Of course not.
no, it's not
No.
sustainable.
But she's not gonna see that. And she has a lesson, she's in this for a lesson. And so she's gonna, you know, at some point. She has the blind, she can't see, so she learns the lesson, so the karma will come up. But then she's gonna have to either have a new perspective, learn something, or she will probably repeat that karma again.
Well, this is
So
what
it'll
it's
be-
this
So
is
it's like.
this is like different tragedy, same person, like she just has lots of lessons to
She's
learn.
had the blinders on for a while.
She has, because I'm like, just as you're like approaching healing, this major backslide,
Yeah.
so I think it's just not.
And
It's,
it
Yeah.
could be that, like, I mean, for that sounds like a huge distraction. You know how we said sometimes we don't wanna go there
Yeah.
because there's pain?
Could
That
she be going,
sounds like a huge distraction from, you know, dealing with what's in her life.
I was gonna say, if it's a midlife thing, she's like, I'm getting older, I will never be attractive. I don't know, I'm, making
Yeah.
that up.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because like
I'm
all of this is hard enough to take in, like how I want it to be for me, but to have to think about, like, I'm thinking of friends that I've talked to or
Right,
given
to
advice
hold
to, and I'm
attachment.
like, I've given poor advice, or like, I haven't even been thinking properly to give advice.
Yeah,
So that's a whole nother piece of it.
well, that's why we become more compassionate, because we just are like, oh my gosh, well, that's a mess.
yeah, you can see that she can't control it right now.
And there's nothing you can say that is gonna make her understand. But you also can have compassion too, because like what 25-year-old knows what they're doing? Like,
That's-
that's the worst part,
I'm
like, I
just
mean,
like, this is all a mess.
the train wreck.
all a
Yeah,
mess.
and it's just, it's hard to watch. I always remember in those kind of situations. And, okay, so 2 things. One is, the Buddhist definition of a friend is someone who keeps watching you make the same mistake over and over again, and they're still your friend.
That's what I told her. I was like, I love you. It's like, I love you, but I see this.
Yeah.
And I see this.
And I see this, yeah.
And that's for the Buddhist
Yeah.
definition, okay.
The other thing is, shame doesn't really work. So like, I know too, when I've done crazy things in my life, when someone's made me feel bad about them, I just kind of shut them out.
Yeah.
And so like, you probably don't want to do that either. Yeah. Well,
I just said, all I said was that, she asked me for my advice and I just said that she is making choices right now. I said, every day you're making a choice, and what you're telling me is that you want this person to love you and you're like
what's
experiencing.
the 25-year-old thinking?
I know.
I know it happens. I just,
No,
like,
but
I have a hard time because it's
can't
like a
even-
baby.
we
Like,
can't
you know what I
even
mean? It's like a
open-
baby at that
We
point.
can't even open this can of worms because then she's
Yeah.
like, oh, he has these mommy dreams, and I'm like,
Oh, boy.
stop. Yeah, so there's that.
So
too.
there's
She has a
probably
blind
trauma,
spot.
which is,
Yeah.
being that
terrible.
old is probably really traumatic for him.
He has lots of trauma. She's told me about it. I'm just like, oh my goodness gracious.
Yeah.
The one thing that I did say is that you have a pattern that I've witnessed and that you want to fix people.
And it's just so interesting to see like a case study like that, where someone is so identified with the thought, they really can't.
Nobody's home.
and
No
even-
higher self is home.
or they know it's not the right thing to be doing and they can't stop doing it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, I think we talk ourselves, so thinking about like the thoughts we tell ourselves, which I guess would be like the false understanding.
Yeah.
I believe that you can talk yourself into things about yourself that just aren't true. Like you were
Yeah.
saying before, well, I'm this way, I'm not, I don't know, I'm not outgoing or whatever.
Yeah.
And then you really start to believe that, but as you peel the layers away, maybe you really are, you just got that in your head somehow. She's
Becomes
just-
a self-fulfilling
So she, maybe
prophecy.
she's, yeah, like she created this self-fulfilling prophecy and her actions are trying to live
Well,
that out.
that's the idea, like we become what we think about. I mean, and that's why you wanna think good things about yourself, because, you know,
Positive energy.
it's
Yeah.
just better.
Stay away from people that don't.
Yeah.
Or
We've
make you
already
not
gotten
right.
rid of people that have low vibration, like,
And
oh
then oh my God, this is like my oldest friend, am I really gonna bail on her? Not now.
Yeah.
But I had to separate myself from people that are just low vibration, because I'm like, it's not helping me in any way.
And you're not helping them anyways, because they're not. you know.
Right.
I can't receive it.
So
Sorry, I'm sorry.
that's okay, no, this is all like, cause I think what happens is, and when it's us, we really do tend to believe in our thoughts, and that is probably the hardest thing to realize, that none of your thoughts, where do they're not your own. They just, like, when we talk about Purusha and property, and I know I've said this before, we have a witness. Thoughts are property, they're not Purusha. And that's like the,
Is Purusha the witness?
yes, thoughts are property. Yeah, like the seer, yeah. Pure consciousness. It's, Purusha is who we are, our essential nature. So that means we're not our thoughts, we're not our emotions, we're not anything. We're not our personalities that we think we have, that everyone tells us we have. You know what I mean? Oh, I love how you do this. Sometimes. Want to do a really cool exercise? I did it so long ago, I hope I get it right. I wrote down, I think maybe I told you, I wrote down all of the rules, like ROLES, all of my rules that I had in my life, and I burned them one at a time. Because I don't want to have any rules. And more rules. You know, but like you're this person, like, you know, sister, mother, like you are just entangled. And like when you say no, that's not really who I am. Or some people, I mean, people like to label things because it makes them feel safe. They like to put things in boxes. Oh, well, you're the kind of person that would do this. No, I'm not. You know what I mean? Like, no, you know, like that's not, I think we do that to each other, but like just to kind of help us sort through things, because we're human beings and we like to do that for survival, but that's not necessarily true. Like you can be like, oh my gosh. You know, I have people say, oh, you're so chilled out. Sometimes, not all the time. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, I'm not. And so, or like, you know, oh, you know, even if it's a negative thing, like, oh my gosh, you know, you really, you can't sing. Like that's one of the foreground. You can't sing. That's not true. Then everybody can sing. You know, but somebody might say that just because they're annoyed that day or whatever. And like we tend to believe things that people tell us.
Yeah, if you ask a child, they'll say they can sing. because they
Yeah.
can.
Yeah.
So do most, oh, this could be depressing, do most people go through their entire lives not really knowing who they are?
Yeah.
Yeah, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I know. Oh, I know, right?
My dad just said she's just like this swirling black hole.
Oh,
He said that.
I would think the majority of people in our lives are like, won't be able to access.
No, you, I mean, you really have to practice staying self-aware, and like that takes, and that's what meditation is. Like, you can think about it as a lot of things, and it is a lot of things, but you're really becoming aware, oh, I'm doing this, or I'm believing this again, or, you know, and it's like,
And you're not the person you were 2 years ago.
no,
I mean, thank goodness.
That's my
as I
memory
get
again is
older,
like one of
I
the,
feel I'm getting more aware and I know,
Yeah.
oh, this is what I really like. Why am I doing this? Why was I doing all this, the things that I didn't like? But now I started to realize like, this is what I like.
Yeah.
This is what I don't like.
Yes.
Yeah. Before it was very confusing and, kept doing things that are not pleasant, that good for you and.
Yeah.
I tend to put pressure on myself to be a certain way as I get older.
Yeah.
Like, I remember doing this when I turned 40. Like, no more bad decisions, like, I'm gonna be like focused on work and whatever. And now I'm gonna be 47 and I think of like my grandma at that age, who in my mind had it all together and, was like taking care of things. I'm like, oh my God, like I forgot that it was pajama day at school, so I put all these little like pressures on myself
Oh, yeah.
in terms of age and experience.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to work on that,
Yeah, I mean, I think with women too, a lot of it is like we place our self-worth on how much we get done or how much we can accomplish. I find myself doing that too, where I get into these, just phases where I am doing too much. Like, it's like ridiculous how much, I guess I'm getting stuff done, but at what cost? And like, I don't know what it is where, like that's a person that is so efficient and can get some done and makes them, like, that's just another false role, So, and yet you just become aware because a lot of people, like you said, are just gonna do that and not even realize they're doing it.
Like for example, even like, doing yoga, trying to be perfect. Pose. Now, as I'm getting older, I'm like, no, this is not what I want to be like,
Yeah.
I can still practice and be happy and not look for being perfect.
Yeah. Just want to have a good time, feel good in my body. I don't have to do all the really hard things. It's okay, But, so basically that's the first part of the Yoga Sutra, the first chapter. And then they talk about, well, these thoughts can be mastered with practice and non-attachment. So that is, I'm gonna just, I think it's 12, but it might be 13. Oh, 12.
That can be controlled through practice and non-attachment.
That's it. And 113 is then just defines practice. Ardent effort to retain the peaceful flow of mind free from running tendencies is abhyasa practice. So we know yoga, like the mastery of the mind is keeping the mind focused on something, probably meditative for most of us. But if we're talking about people that need a little extra help, we might need to give them, their practice might look more like focusing through asana or, like doing a breath work or something else that's going to help them settle their mind and their nervous system a little bit. So that's going to make them stronger, where then they can tackle on these attachment issues that they have in their world that, because, what we see in the second chapter of the Yoga Sutra is how karmas come up, like how we find ourselves in this situation again, or, whatever. You want to look at those things, first of all, compassionately, but also from a place of strength. Because if you're like, oh my gosh, I just, I still can't, whatever, find a job or whatever, and you're not practicing anything to make yourself feel supported. Or I lost a family member. And you're not doing it, like you're dealing with grief, you're dealing with attachment there, and like the totally normal thing to go through. You want to do that where you're supported. So what are the practices that support you? So that's what I think about. Like when I'm working with someone, I think about not just about yoga, but what are the things that could make them feel stronger? Whether it's going for a walk 3 times a week, or what is going to make them feel good, so that then we can start talking about this other stuff. So that's kind of what these, so you could probably read 112 through 1, or I think just 13, let's see here. 14, 15, should be through 15. Let me read this to you though.
Cumulatively, though, right? Starting from the beginning all the way up to 114.
Yeah, 115, like, I mean, if you're reading 1 through 10, you're reading about the virtues. And if you're reading, or 12 through 15, you're reading about practicing non-attachment.
So all this will be just for ourselves to understand. But
Yes.
When we are teaching, we will be just doing the sequence class.
For now.
Yeah.
But it's planting a seed, because sometimes you do think about, like, when I work with somebody, I think about, okay, what are we working with their attachments? What practices am I giving them to make them stronger? Like, I always frame things that way. Or if I do a workshop, I think about having both kinds of practices in there. So, okay, so we're gonna read. I'm just gonna read you a little bit of the commentary of chapter 15 about non-attachment, because I think that one's a tricky. That's tricky to think about what that means. In Sutra 112, Patanjali prescribes a two-part method, abhyasa and vairagya, which is practicing non-attachment, for arresting the roaming tendencies of the mind and yoking it to samadhi. So remember, we're still working with the mind. By practicing abhyasa, we train our mind to retain its peaceful flow and clearly discern what is real and what is not real. By practicing vairagya, we cultivate a mind free from the coloring of vasanas. What are vasanas? Vasanas are repeated patterns. I think vasana, the closest word is personality. These things that we repeat over time, so they become part like of our personality. That would be a strong, that's vasana. By practicing non-attachment, we cultivate a mind free from the coloring of vasanas. It's non-attachment in the sense that it enables us to detach ourselves from the binding forces of the vasanas stored in our mind. This is a lengthy process. How lengthy depends on the number and complexity of our vasanas. But once they are cleared, few if any obstacles remain on our inner journey. A mind free from vasanas reflects the true nature of the inner self. At this point, vairagya, as a process of decolorizing the mind, comes to an end because the mind's illuminating power is no longer veiled. The truth pertaining to our inner self reflects in the mind in its purity and fullness. A clear and complete understanding of reality is the highest state of vairagya. Let me see here. Okay. I'm gonna keep reading a little bit down because it's just interesting. I think it'll just it'll make sense with what we were talking about. As we've seen, the mind is the repository of innumerable habits, samskaras, and vasanas, which are constantly influencing us from deep within. When we do our practice well, we create new habits. That's practice. And as we continue practicing for a long time, these new grooves turn into samskaras. As these new samskaras are continually reinforced, they become vasanas. At this stage, the well-defined, extremely focused vasana of our practice has gathered enough strength and momentum to withstand the storm of vasanas arising from deep within and to eventually neutralize it. So the positive vasanas are trying to withstand these negative things that we've stored. This inner accomplishment engendered by the practice of abhyasa emerges when we are extremely fortunate. It arises from an unshakable determination to stay with the practice in conjunction with factors Patanjali addresses later, including the grace of God, the blessing of accomplished masters, and vairagya. Vairagya is prominent among these factors, for it leads to the attenuation and ultimate elimination of the vasanas that agitate our mind. Patanjali elaborates on this last factor in the sutra. The negative samskaras and vasanas deposited in our mind perform two functions. They agitate the mind, causing it to fluctuate aimlessly. They take up so much space that they afford little room for the newly created samskaras of our practice. The Evicting these agitating some scars, making room for those that are spiritually illuminating, and ultimately cultivating a mind that is perfectly clear and still, and thus constantly aware of the reality within, is by Roswell.
So if I think I'm an impatient person, I was just gonna say I am an impatient person, but now I'm thinking like, maybe I just told myself I am. Would that be considered a negative asana? Impatience, like a personality trait or thing?
Yeah, maybe getting frustrated with yourself because probably the reality is sometimes you're patient and sometimes you're impatient, like all of us.
Right, okay,
But like if you say, oh, I'm such an impatient person,
okay,
that is labeling and reinforcing that. It probably causing you to be a little bit more like that,
right, like,
you know?
some things, a thought begets a thought,
Yeah.
yeah, okay. So what would the positive one be that would overcome that? Like non-judgment of,
Yeah, I would be like, sometimes I'm patient and sometimes I'm not.
yeah, okay,
You
One
know,
thing that we say a lot is like, watch what you make it mean.
okay,
Like, so it could be something you're saying to yourself or something that somebody else has said to you. And it just kind of catches you and like makes you rethink about,
Yeah.
watch what you make it mean. What did you just make that mean?
yeah,
yeah.
You got upset with somebody when they cut you off or whatever. But
right.
when you were reading, I was kind of thinking like that whole watch your thoughts before they become your, the words and the actions and the habits and the personality and
Yes.
whatever, the character.
Yeah.
And then I was also thinking about how I feel like you kind of alluded to this, but it didn't say it there. Like, if we're trying new things, right? Like an instrument or a sport or something, then it's kind of shaking up the negative process.
Yes. Just like, that's just like getting out of your routine. Like, that's why I love retreats, because people don't wake up and see the same people that they usually see. There's just something different, and then that gives you a little space. Because as soon as if you wake up in the same bed, you probably do the same thing almost every day when you wake up. And breaking that habit. Yeah. Yeah. Any way you can, so learning something new. That's probably why they say doing puzzles and whatever is good for, Alzheimer's or learning a new language, because you are disrupting
Yeah.
the way the brain is cycling. So that's the first part of the first chapter. So then they defined two kinds of samadhi. One is with a seed and one is without a seed. So one, you're focusing on something like the breath or a mental image or a mantra or whatever it is. And the other one is you are just resting in your awareness. And I read something, I was doing Bhagavad Gita for something else. And it said, it counseled that like, if you have a body, usually you need one with a seed. Like if you are living in a body, you need to meditate with one with a seed. I was like, okay, that's interesting. They're tools. They help to anchor the mind. Just being in bliss, it might happen on its own every once in a while, and that's wonderful. But it's good to have that focus. And so they talk about that in like the 17th, 18th, and 19th, that there's sampragyata samadhi and asampragyata. So they talk about that. And then most of the 20s, like the, sutras through the 20s, are talking about what this essential nature is. This higher reality. Like not bound by time, space, causation, omniscient. Let's read a couple of them.
Omniscient, that to me is like God,
Yeah,
like all knowing, right?
yes.
Okay.
Not subject to the things that we normally are on this plane, because it's not of this plane. So let's go 20. Oh, so it all starts out with 123. From trustful surrender to Ishvaraha, they have God, Samadhi also comes. So whether God is a loaded term for you, whatever you think it is, it's a higher order than your small individual everyday self. And like sometimes we try to, well, we were talking about the Bhagavad Gita last week and how sometimes we try to force things. We do something because of what we hope to get from it. And this is saying, when we let go, it's not that we don't do anything. We put a reasonable amount of effort. Yoga is clear about that. It's not just sit and wait for good things to happen to you. But once you've done everything, or a reasonable amount, anyways, there is a letting go. You know, where you're just like, okay, well, obviously it's not working for me to try to control this. So, you know, but we do forget about that and trust that there's a higher order or there's something happening or it's, you know, but the reason why it's trustful is because we're counting on this Ishvaraha to be pretty good. Like we don't want to trustfully surrender to something that doesn't deserve our trustful surrender. So that's what we're going to start talking about in the 20s. Here, we're on 23. Let's see, 24 is Ishvaraha is a unique being, untouched by afflictions, karmas, the results of karmas, and the repository of karmas. So not trapped, like we were talking about last week, about this action. I like this, I don't like this, I'm motivated to do the action, and we have these karmas. You know, so this particular force or whatever would not have any karmas at all. Nothing to play out there.
I think it's interesting that it says being.
Yes, it is. I mean, it's yeah, because it's talked about in different ways. Another term is called Jata Vedas, and that means it's like an omniscient field that knows everything that's happened, that will happen, that, you know. I was reading something else in the Bhagavad Gita where Krishna says that, you know, they were talking about time and they were calling it a kalpa. And it was something like, I don't know, I'm gonna say like 4 trillion years, human years, was half a day of the gods. You know what I mean? And like, I mean, it was just so bizarre. And I'm like, yeah, did they need to break this down? But like, you know, like it's just very interesting how we have this small concept, and we have our senses to perceive things. And like, remember, our senses are okay instruments, but they're not the best.
Yeah.
Dogs can hear a lot more than we can.
Right.
I mean, we can only see so much, you know. And so we just don't have the tools to be able to perceive everything that's there. You know, we just can't see it. Yes.
She's just so full. It's a fullness there. I
Yeah.
don't have.
And like different animals have different sense perceptions. So they're gonna be able to see different things, but all animals can't perceive everything.
Right.
That's just the way our faculties are. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So there is a force out there that doesn't have those limitations.
So my husband was just explaining to me about this, like there is a pot, you know, there is a pot. There is like a building, you know, there is a person, yeah. Something like that he was trying to explain to me about this.
Yeah.
Yeah, God. It's
Yeah.
about God.
That's how he was, yeah.
Yeah, he was trying to put it in a simple words, like if there is a potter, that means, you know, there is a potter, if there is a building, like the same way, you know, there is a God.
Like a creator.
A creator, yeah. Energy, yeah.
It could just be that,
Yeah.
yeah,
Exactly.
Right. Like everything comes from something.
Something, exactly, yeah.
yeah. And what is that, or why would that be? That is the question, but that's what they say. I asked that question to one of my teachers one time, and he was like, so why? Just why?
Right,
Exactly.
right.
And he's like, two answers. The one, the Buddha was shot by an arrow. And his disciple came and said, oh my gosh, who would have done this? How did that happen? And he's like, stop asking questions, take the arrow out. And so, and the other one, he said, this is the divine play. It makes things interesting.
That's a lot to think about.
It is a lot to think about, or what we have, it's just, I could never answer these questions, but like Big Bang, how many have we had?
Right.
How many times?
Oh, right.
Yeah, we just don't even know.
But like, that's making me feel empathy again, like I did before, like, could someone from that had schizophrenia, like, do this? No. So like, people that, like, don't have access to do or talk like we are, it makes me sad,
Yeah. But there's
I know that I don't
different ways
need
to
to
know
be thinking
things
about
too.
that, but I don't know.
And they might be, people with schizophrenia might be tuned into something that they might be.
Oh, that we
perceiving.
don't, yeah, right.
Yeah, they
okay.
might be perceiving, and that might be driving them crazy. But,
Yeah, you're right.
they might be,
Yeah, I remember once expressing like, again, empathy or feeling, I'm like, oh, Jim, I feel bad for that person because of X, Y, Z. And he's like, you have no idea. They might be the most joyful person
Yeah.
that you've ever met, and you don't know their experience. So, okay, you're right.
I mean, but you're right too. You know what I mean? Like, so it's both. You can't really look at someone who's having a hard time and be like, well, they might be having a hard time, because that's actually kind of privilege too.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? So we have to
True.
be careful. It's like a rate. It's just like, you could be careful.
Sorry, excuse me.
With that.
I'm just, you have to be careful, like
Right.
putting, you say, think that empathy is feeling bad,
yeah,
Right.
right.
because it's not. 'cause
Right, you're right.
That's putting yourself at a higher level.
Yeah.
And
Right.
the whole thing of empathy is just trying to like figure out what it looks like. Their perspective.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
No, that's okay.
No, that makes sense.
So, so this is why we're talking about like this thing that's just not really subject to, it could be whatever your experience of it is, or you can conceive it to be. There's not rules. Like this part is, they don't have a lot of terms. So they use terms that you may be comfortable with, you may not be comfortable with. But just think about, it could be God, it could be a field, it could be, just something that is not subject to the same things we are here, just because of our dimension that we're in. So that's what we're talking about. We, go through that all through the 20s until, so we see therein in Ishvara lies the seed of unsurpassed omniscience. And then he is the one who's been the preceptor of all previous teachers, for he is not limited by time. So this thing is just there.
There is no.
Yes, because it's not subject to anything. And
Or
then,
gender.
Like the video
yes,
that we watched.
yes, definitely
What's
not.
that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I watched the video,
Yeah.
it shows
Is
the
it short for
video last week.
Yes,
Oh, okay.
it's- yeah.
I have not yet.
Oh
Yeah.
my god,
Okay.
I showed my kids that video that you
Oh.
showed us last week. I
Oh,
showed my kids and husband, my kids loved it.
Isn't
And
it
my older
great?
one was like amazed, he's 13. It's like, it's true, mom, it's true.
oh, good.
Yeah.
I'm so glad. I love it too. I should
Yeah,
say part of the
yeah.
report. Yes. I should to everyone who will watch it.
I can't wait to watch it.
So anyways, in 127, they say pranava or om is the denoter of that Ishvara. So if you heard om being this like kind of everything, well, it kind of makes sense. That's what we call, that's a vibration of this thing. But it's not just, I think it's the easiest at this time to say, oh, but any mantra, because they all have, they all are a derivative. They're just a slice of, it's just, they all have that divine in it. So, moving forward.
There'll be a lot of corrected tattoos out there.
Yeah.
Just cross it off.
Okay, so interesting, like we keep talking about what this means to remember, like, so when you think or meditate on Om, you're reflecting really on that, which is just that beingness, everything, yeah. And that is why, just as a side note, I don't mean to make it more confusing. Usually people don't meditate on Om. That's not a mantra that's given. Because it attaches you and takes you away from the world to something that's so far beyond, you lose touch with reality. So most of us need a different mantra that's more not Om. Actually, it's for monks or things like that who use Om, but they're not trying to work in the world.
Because when I did the
Yeah.
meditation, sometimes
It's so harmless to
towards the last
Just
7
one
months meditation, I almost body and not
Yeah.
outside. And then after that,
Yes.
he said, like not
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's
about
for 2 minutes, so, yeah.
And that's okay, that's
Yeah.
okay. But like saying it, like, so your mantra, you usually say like, well, even when you're starting out 108 times, you know, and then more. So that just wouldn't be an appropriate mantra for someone who's in the world, because we're householders. We're householders, we're doing stuff, so we wouldn't. Oh,
So, and what was it?
well, I'm saying, but it's it's 3 letters, U, and M of the Sanskrit language.
Yeah, there's a Greek
He said,
podcast.
Yeah, it's
And
also
then
part of,
we had a song, after that meditation was over, then he finished with a praising Lord Sanskrit song, Lord Krishna, and it was actually not bad, I felt good.
good,
Yeah.
well, then it works.
So we could do any meditation online, because I just felt I just couldn't do it. The 10
Yeah.
minutes.
But yes, do it, but like, remember what the steps are. And think about how that fits into what our steps
Yeah,
are.
he said it was Isha Kriya.
Okay.
Kriya, yeah.
You know, they have
That's
different
what
kriyas,
three
but just
dimensions.
even just listen to the words, like, does he give you time to feel your body, or does he give you a bridge in?
He did, yeah. He gave full instruction and then only he started. It was
Yes.
all for yeah.
So, you know, that's what you're looking for. That's what we, when the meditation journal assignment, I want to see that you understand the 5 steps.
Okay.
So,
Could you, at some point, just sort of review with us, like doing meditation, because you can't, it's very difficult just to sit down and just start meditating. right?
yes.
So you need to kind of prepare for it, and like, so interesting, it'd be interesting to know like what you do, for example, what you know other people do, or what you find useful, like time constraints, or, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, we can talk about that. Maybe we'll start out with that next time. Yeah, no problem. So we're getting into a different topic. We're getting into impediments and what they look like in the body. So we're gonna stop before we can't do it in 5
Are these the 30s?
minutes. It's 29,
Oh, okay.
getting into the 30.
Oh, I
It says,
see.
in 21, 29 says, therefrom comes the experience of inner being as well as the elimination of impediments. It's like, oh, well, what are the impediments?
Yeah.
You know? Yeah.
What is impediment?
Means like,
Obstacle?
obstacles and the way they express themselves in the body. And they end up being like disease, doubt, carelessness, stuff like that. There's a long list.
Check, no.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, so this transparency of, or, you know, this resting and trustful surrender of this, you know, helps the elimination of the impediments. So resting, and it's really resting. If you think about, have you ever, well, you guys just started my meditation class, but what you're gonna notice is, if you're ever not well, if you're ill, it is not easy to meditate. Yeah, so you just rest and you do a really easy, just, oh, I feel good right now. You don't try to do your whole thing.
If you can't put your pulse up, then just getting your feet wet
Yeah, just
is okay.
then remembering why you're doing it. I want to feel peace right now. Well, I'm just gonna find my breath and maybe like visualize myself as a light,
Mhm.
you know, whatever it is. Then that, you know, will help. But it's like disease, thinking about illness, it's harder. Because you're hurting,
Yeah.
you know? So we'll talk
Sometimes
about
I've come out though better, like that, a
Yeah.
headache,
Yeah,
like
Yeah.
in particular.
a lot of times the headache is the
Tension.
nostrils
Um,
too, if you do some alternate nostril.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. That'll help. Because sometimes it's just balancing out the energy.
Today I felt a like numbing, tingling sensation in my spine,
Oh, okay.
and I thought that I was imagining it, and so I pulled myself out of whatever.
And that's okay. We
Oh,
do
in
that.
class. During class?
At home.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And I was like, was something cool gonna happen? Like, I was kind of annoyed with myself later, like,
It happens.
and I was like, what is?
Yeah,
And
because
then I
it's scary.
forget-
And then you realize that you're doing it. Like,
Yeah.
you were lost in the moment and then you're like, wait a minute. Yeah.
I think that's cool.
Is it when you're meditating?
Yeah. Because again, it's that, like, that energy, maybe that you felt a little bit, or like you were accessing the deeper space.
I think, like, afterward, that's what I thought. I thought I was like, maybe, it also was the day where I had reached my 15-minute mark.
Yay. Good for you.
So, I don't know.
Very cool. Very cool stuff. Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Kate.
Bye, people on
Hey,
watching
it's
the recording.
hard not